So we have Kate and Fruzsi with us today. They are longtime collaborators of Space Saloon and also just like the nicest people you'll ever meet. We asked Kate to present her very recently finished master's thesis because we felt like it had a lot of relevance for the lab. Usually they're on site with us in both of our festivals as technical support because they're both extremely talented in working with materials. But I think we'll see a different side to Kate today, one that's sort of more orientated around research and community engagement, and with sort of a relationship between the urban realm and the architectural realm. And yeah, I'll leave that as is and leave it up to them from now on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you guys for having us. So I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah. I saw a bit of Monitor Lizard's presentation the other day. I'm afraid mine's going to be very low-tech, lo-fi by comparison. I'm just going to talk you guys through this webpage that I've been working on as part of my thesis. So this is me. As Rebecca said, this is me at Space Saloon last year, helping as one of the technical coordinators. And I was there with Fruzsi, who is here with me again today. We met at Cambridge doing our undergrad in architecture. And then in the couple of years after that, have been doing various projects together before going back to do our master's thesis. And our minds kind of think in very different ways, but quite complementary. So I'm hoping that by having her here today, she can like pick up on, because she knows my work quite well, can pick up on any points that maybe I miss or highlight things that are interesting for people who think a little differently from myself. And then this is where I am now. So studying, just finishing up my thesis at Central St Martin's in London on the MArch course there. But today I'm going to be talking about my thesis project called Things in Common, Infrastructures of Care in Suburban Residential Redbridge. But specifically, I think the part that relates to Space Saloon really strongly and relevant for you guys in this like research section of the project is this idea of the methodology and like a way to engage with a place in the physical realm rather than the digital realm. So it's this idea of situated practice, which means a way that is kind of playful to engage in a city, open-ended and really specific to a local place. And this was introduced by my tutors, Verity Jane Keefe and Julia King, who you can check out at these links here. And my site is Redbridge. So this is an area of outer London. For context, the bits of London that you might see in photos and things happen really just in this central area, but London is a huge place with many outer London boroughs as well, and Redbridge is one of those. I grew up here in Bromley, and then I found this like instant affinity with Redbridge that sits in a similar position to the centre of London and kind of felt really familiar to me when I first stepped foot there. So this is what 78% of the built-up area of Redbridge looks like, and what in reality most of London looks like as well. It's this very, I guess, typically British kind of model of housing where it's low-rise residential, one household per plot of land, terraced houses going on into infinity kind of thing.
Sorry, just to butt in. And it's really interesting that these huge developments were carried out throughout the suburbs in the Victorian area. And then I think the majority of the people own their own house, right?
Yeah.
And then kind of since that time when they got built, it hasn't really been done anything major to, and architects don't really focus on it beyond kind of an extension level. And so that's kind of become an interesting brief in the whole of your course, right? Of like looking at things that architects don't tend to look at. So then you kind of start from a blank slate. Like, how do you look at something that you kind of know, but you don't actually know, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it was this feeling that it's kind of familiar to me, but also I've never actually been here before. And also, like Fruzsi said, like all the kind of architectural funding and big projects that you see are going into town centres. And no one's really paying attention to these places. So that's what I wanted to do from the outset. So step one is just carefully observing. I visited a number of times, kind of almost at random, and just started taking photos of anything that caught my eye. So you can see people making adaptations to their houses that kind of show people's personality in a funny way, and that's like Fruzsi said, but possible because people tend to own their houses in this kind of area rather than the rental model that's in the city centres. This is a notice about someone stealing this guy's packages, and I kind of loved this idea that someone would just take a Sharpie and write on the front of their house, something that I would never consider doing, but you see these things going on. And there's this massive culture of like renovation and extensions going on to these houses, and so you see skips in a lot of front driveways, and there's this like huge quantity of material that's flowing through these suburbs every day. And then maybe more hostile DIY additions to houses, someone putting shards of glass on the boundary wall. And there is these areas with quite high crime rates as well, and really huge range of demographics and financial inequality throughout the borough as well. And exploring the kind of edges of my site as well. So like half an hour away from the streets that I'm focused on, there are more affluent areas. Visiting at different times of day, you get a kind of different feel for what's going on. And I became kind of obsessed with who's taking care of the spaces, specifically in the public space. You see this kind of disregard for the public street, and who takes care of what. So the kind of central government and local government actually, and councils are supposed to take care of the communal areas and public streets, but they're facing massive budget cuts. And then the individual residents take care of their houses. And you can see these kind of adaptations that every house looks kind of the same, but also different depending on the decorations and extensions that have happened over time. So walking became a really crucial part of this whole project. And kind of, as I said, at first going at random and seeing what spoke to me. So this was the first walk that we went on as a group, being led by my tutors through different kind of vibes of streets. And then I just went back a couple of times at random to kind of get a sample of the area. And then gradually starting to pick up on things that interested me, like the security that I mentioned. And then from looking at maps as well, I became interested in these two specific areas, going back and forth between the affluent and less affluent areas of the borough. And on each of these pages, I recorded the kind of mood that I was in that day, what I was thinking about and observing, and then outcomes of my walks, be it photos or drawings, that kind of thing, so that you get a sense that over time I'm getting to know the place much better and then having specific ideas the next time that I go back to investigate.
This is where I think it becomes very interesting of thinking of what architects tend to do as kind of research, because this element of your project is basically equivalent to an architectural research, but coming from kind of, I used to work in a very big corporate office last year, and the only research they did there was from really zoomed out maps and kind of local government strategies, and it was very, very much zoomed out, and they already knew what they were trying to find. They knew what they were kind of already interested in. And here you walked around and you let the place tell you what was interesting about that particular place. So I think that's kind of a necessary shift of focus or a shift of mindset that would be very beneficial for architects to make, of like, let the place tell you what's interesting about it, and not you kind of force your own interest on this place that might not have anything to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. And as well, at the start, it's kind of being present in the project as well. So at the start, it was just like, oh, this feels like my hometown. Why does it feel like that? What are the things that look the same? So like admitting your own interests and then following those as well, so that the project becomes like a synthesis of what the place is telling you and what you bring to the place, I guess. And then I made this kind of map of all of my research that I'll zoom into a little bit. So here are icons of just like every walk that I went on over time, every person I met, every person I heard about, Facebook groups I joined, books I read, and then into documentation like government policy, local policy, and newspapers on through time. And then the pink dotted lines are my trains of thought. So from initial walks, I had a few different ideas. That Redbridge feels like home, I'm interested in suburbs, that kind of thing. And then some trains just kind of lead to nowhere and don't carry on. And then others carried on through the whole project. So thinking about inequalities in the area, reading specific policy documents about that, finding a key text. And then at the end, like keeping researching, reading, and walking across site the whole time, so that at the end, my trains of thought kind of culminate in these key events that kind of take me through the end of the project, or like where to go next. Oops, sorry.
And sorry, one thing, and I think kind of connecting back to how research should be somewhat changed. I think it's, for me at least, I'm very bad at this. Once your research becomes an instinctive kind of careful listening and careful looking, you then have to make sure that you record it, and it becomes still a research and it becomes a methodology. And I think the difference between just kind of experiencing a place and actually listening and looking at it or listening to it is this recording. And here with this big diagram, you can see how many ways it could have gone. You know, all of these trains of thought would have led to a different project, and someone else might have taken it that way. And maybe if this document becomes kind of a central resource, then other people can take it another way. But Kate specifically, with her combination of interests and herself in this project, took it this way. And the recording part of it makes it into a valuable resource and a proper research, not just kind of, I don't know, diary pages, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I was like fully conscious all the time to like, whatever I do, make a record of it, and whatever I do, you have write it down. And then at the end of a few weeks, you have a kind of body of work that is a bit larger than the sum of its parts. And then using like different ways of working as well. So as well as photographs, using drawing skills that I've like got throughout my architectural education, so that you know, it would be socially unacceptable to walk up to someone on the high street and take a photo of their face, or at least very difficult to have that conversation. But these portraits I just drew walking past people, trying to remember their faces. I'm doing a sketch in 30 seconds. So it's kind of trying to always be a bit sensitive to your subject matter. And I was trying to capture here the diversity of these kind of areas. And I really like this quote that there's no such thing as a typical suburbanite. And then the really fun part starts, which is once you've started to make these careful observations, you can begin to interact in the place. So this is a picture of me on a random Tuesday morning, volunteering with the nature conservation volunteers. On this particular day, they were pulling up reeds from the river overflow lake thing in the local park. But I wanted to find a way to I guess make friends in the area, and get a bit of oral history and kind of research that you can't do from your computer, being in touch with people on the ground.
Oh, here I really love that story that the tutor that Kate mentioned at the beginning. As an example, she says that she always gets her nails done in the nail salon of the area, and kind of scope out the goss and whatever, and whatever way you can connect to a place. Kate likes to get her hands dirty with local people. Her tutor likes to get her nails done by the local nail salon. I think whatever you can make a connection with, that's a really strong personal input, right?
Yeah, and it's also really important to this way of working, that this idea of exchange. So I was giving something to the area, and in return getting some new knowledge. It's not just about being this kind of invasive take and then spit it back at you kind of thing, but being kind of invested in the places as well as I'm going along. And then I made this image just with some chalk and a plastic board to highlight this kind of imbalance, what I saw as an imbalance of space in the suburbs, where you have these houses that are really tightly crammed together and quite kind of pokey inside, and then there's all this free space on the street that is kind of waiting for a car to come and park on it, but a lot of the time just is empty and unused. So this sign as a way to talk about this tension between the private domestic space and the public space of the street, and also the kitchen is a place where you really care about it and it means so much to you. So why can't this bit of street mean a lot to the people here as well? I started to collect the objects that I had walked past in skips, and this as well as kind of thinking about, what do these objects mean? Can an object in someone's skip tell you anything about the person? It's also another way to talk to people. So I was going up to houses and knocking on their doors and asking to take something from the skip, where I might not have a reason to knock on anyone's door otherwise. And comparing skip rubbish from the affluent and less affluent areas, like I mentioned before.
I also think that it's an interesting question of who does rubbish belong to? Because I know that in Hungary it's illegal to pick stuff out of containers, because it legally at that point belongs to the local council. But then all they're going to do is bring it to a landfill. So if you can actually use it as a resource, then why can you not pick it out? But it's illegal. So it's an interesting question of, how do we look at this bulk of material? Even if it is useful to somebody, it's somehow frowned upon legally. And for me, that was an interesting clash as well.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of different practices. In one area of London, people leave things out on their doorstep all the time for people to take, and it's a really working system. And in others, it's seen as unsightly. There's no rubbish on the street, and in others, you wait months and months for the council to take it away. So then I made a table out of this, out of these collections. So I wanted to, on one level, talking about caring for these materials and using craft, and I guess the materials telling you something of what they might be able to be through a certain combination that you happen to find, but also the big wooden parts of this table were from an affluent area, and then the rest of it was from a less affluent area. So I kind of wanted to bring these spaces together that have been divided by distant transport links and wealth inequality for over 200 years to bring them together in this object. And then bringing objects back to the street as well. So this, I noticed from being there quite a while that this kind of curb happens between two driveways where it's not long enough for a car to park next to it, which means that in this part of the street where there's cars on either side, it's actually always empty. There's nothing ever goes there, basically. So just kind of playing around with materials that I had available to me, bringing the table that I made back to the site in a new form. And these are kind of domestic objects as well. So again, playing with this like domestic inside outside kind of divide, and questioning why you wouldn't necessarily bring a picnic chair to a street and have a chat with your neighbor.
Well, at least not in England.
Well, yeah, this is very exactly. It might change from
very
place
localized.
to place. Yeah. And this was also a way for me to. A lot of the things I'm doing are trying to like play with engaging with the public as quite a naturally introverted person. So I was always trying to, like, I want to hear people's opinions, but I personally feel quite uncomfortable just walking up to someone in the street and asking them things. So putting myself in the street in this very strange scenario was kind of an attempt by me to like invite people to come up to me. So someone came up to me and I asked him to take a photo, and then had quite exciting conversations with a lot of people throughout the day. And then recording these conversations as well, and the positive feedback that I got. Similarly, a tactic to make my own business card to do with this project, so that if someone does question me on the street, what am I doing here? I can say, yeah, this is me, this is my project, follow me on Instagram, and then people can find out more or send an angry email to me if they want, whatever. I'm happy to receive both.
Wasn't it after someone got really angry at you?
Yeah, a woman shouted at me for taking a picture of her house.
But then I think once you would have given a business card, then it would have changed the narrative, right?
Yeah,
so kind
exactly.
of suddenly having a purpose, even if it's kind of half-finished purpose.
Yeah.
It still kind of makes it feel okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then like this was kind of trying to draw, but through photography and objects. So this is a real physical dotted line that I made, which is 2 meters long, and then taking it to site. So this image is about how there is this divide that I mentioned where the resident takes care of their own front garden. This is kind of the limit of care and responsibility, I guess. And then the council is responsible for the pavement and the street, but they're not as maybe enthusiastic carers.
Oh, and the size of this was determined by the maximum size that something can be carried on the tube. And it was literally like 2 centimeters shorter than the ceiling of the tube. So that's another interesting thing of like, do you design for your transport or do you design for the photo?
Yeah, very site specific work. Yeah. on every level. Yeah, and this image is kind of a manifesto, I guess, for my project, with me as an outsider with time and energy coming into a place and suggesting that that line of care is moved from the private boundary into the space of the public. Here again, just playing with objects a little bit. So this is a shopping trolley that I found discarded on the street that you might recognize from an earlier photo. And here an Amazon delivery box wrapped in white paper. And this is a very crude basket that I made out of brambles, which I had chopped down as part of the nature conservation volunteering. Again, just playing with the kind of materials that are available and the way that they flow through the suburb, and questioning what's valuable and what's not in this kind of museum-esque display. And then this is kind of the crux of what I see as the point of all this. I did this during last year, so at that point I was here, but it's a timeline, so I'm kind of here now. But the point is that by just picking things up off the street, walking around and volunteering, it's kind of in this very like process-led methodology. It leads to a lot of small interactions and new ideas. So collections, objects that I've made, meeting people in the area, and then always bringing them back, researching and designing and researching and designing, kind of in a spiral forever. So collecting ideas to maybe get a pot of funding or collaborate with a community group, which are things that I've actually been able to do and put in an arts grant application to run a series of workshops in Redbridge. This year, coronavirus has kind of put a pause on that. But the idea is that all of these little actions, although they seem a little bit random and like what's happening, if you bring them into a kind of body of work, can be very meaningful and hopefully lead to meaningful suburban change. So we'll see. So yeah, once you've observed and interacted, just imagine what could be. And if you click here, you can see what I've proposed as part of my thesis with like infrastructures and policy changes that might be applied to this area, but that's not really the point that I wanted to leave you guys with, but more this kind of way of working and to let your project kind of come to you through this process, and then yeah, you'll come out with some equally exciting projects at the end of it, depending on who you are and where you are.
And I think on this website, actually, the place where you left off, there's still a lot of local government data and research going in, but I think it's a very important point to make that it comes after. So I don't think you as a person is interested or are interested in waste. Like if someone asked you what you would do 2 years ago, you wouldn't say, I want to look at rubbish all day, all night. But it was what was interesting to you. But it was what was interesting to you in this place. And now you're interested in it and you are doing the research that you would do on any architectural brief. But it comes from listening and looking at the place. And it's kind of put the legislative research a bit further along, and don't go out and seek out the thing that you already know you want to look for, but let it come to you, and then you can still kind of back it up with data. Because I think it's important to pair the two, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay, we'll leave it there.
If you go back to the so.
Perfect, Kate. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to share the website in the chat. I'll also put it on the Discord. Let's open up to questions, comments. I have a lot, but I'm going to wait because I do most of the talking around here, and I'm tired of my own voice. So I think it's a great project to kind of kick off this this whole theme of researching, and just very much starting with that idea of, you don't have any particular way of starting the project other than just walking. I think that's great as a process and a methodology. So thanks again.
May I add something? I was very interested in like your practice of like using walking as a tool, because like I think that is what I'm struggling to do in Bangkok because of like the situation of like the urban sprawl and everything, and like a walkway are not very good to walk. But like I'm very interested in like so other than walking, were you like traveling by car in the area, and like how was it different, and like why was your initial, how did you come up with this initial idea of like walking as a practice?
Yeah. So I have taken a few journeys through the area with like bus and train and that kind of thing. But I think I guess for my specific interest, where I'm really interested in these terrace houses, it's kind of the only way to get around because I don't have my own car, so I don't have that option. But these streets are like not really well connected to the public transport, so I kind of like the way that you could just walk for like hours and still be in the same kind of street. But it was also introduced quite strongly by my tutor, Verity Jane Keith, and there's a whole like collection of people who talk about walking as practice, and it's actually something that I was interested in before, where my undergrad thesis was about different characters in a book and how they're different, the different routes they walk describe who they are. But also like just use the tools that are available to you. So if you can't walk, then just frame your research by that limitation. So whether it's photos of the terrible pavement that you're like struggling to cope with, or if it's just like photos from this specific angle out of a bus window or out of a car window, I think that can like, that itself can give your research this kind of language and the atmosphere of what you're talking about, I guess.
If I can add something as well, my brief for my project this year is actually very close. It's in a similar suburb, but it's a very different vibe. And for my project, I made sure that I took a train that goes past my site, because I realized that the biggest footfall of that specific area was by train. So I think it's kind of like, whatever the reality of the site is, the most relevant thing to do. Like, I think it would be really weird to analyze LA through walking when everybody drives, right? And it might be similar to Bangkok. I haven't been there.
Yeah.
You know, like basically use it as a frame of reference, because everyone looks at it that way, whereas kids in suburbs walk around.
Well, it's kind of the opposite, I guess. I'm interested in this place where this like area that no one's cared about for a while, and maybe they haven't cared about it because they're not walking through, they're just getting out of their house and getting in the car. So if I wanted to make some research into how does everyone feel in this area, I probably would have to drive a car around.
Yeah.
But I was trying to do something that people have forgotten about, I guess, by walking.
Was walking the main way of traveling by the locals as well? Do they also walk, or like, because I was interested in like the experience of the space through like walking, and I was wondering like, is that how people in that area also travel around?
Yeah. So like pretty much every household has a car, and you see them parked on the street and on the driveways. So you always walk to the train station. Maybe that's like 15-20 minute walk max. You might walk to the like local row of shops, but then outside of that, mostly people would be getting trains into central London if they're commuting, or getting in their car to go to like various shopping centres or like leisure facilities around the borough. Yeah.
But I think the interesting thing about London that really shocked me when I moved here is that it's actually not one giant city with one centre, but it's a million mini centres. And all of these centres have walking distances to most of the houses around them. So these high streets in the area. So Redbridge has what, like 15 little areas that each have their own high streets. So there's still, it's dying a little bit with Amazon and stuff, but there's still kind of a spatial market for walking in your own neighborhood. And then when you go to work and stuff, then you still take the car if you're in the suburbs, mostly. But I guess it's still a bit more of a mixture, exactly, than a lot of other big cities. Sorry.
I really enjoy your presentation. It was very inspiring.
Thank you so much.
Guys, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm so glad that we have this OBS thing now, because my camera doesn't work, so I finally have something to show, on the screen. It's very useful for me. I wanted to highlight something that you mentioned, Fruzsi.
Yeah.
Of how how documenting transforms the way you see. And I was thinking about myself, like when I was just trying to think of when I walk around my neighborhood, which 90% is just to do something else, but then 10% of the times maybe I go around with a camera. And having a camera in my hands changes completely the way I look at things.
Yeah.
So I wonder if, I don't know, it's not a question. I'm just thinking how, it would be interesting to use this kind of rules, kind of protocols for changing the walks just by having different tools with us. And then suddenly, because we are enabled to record what we see, we look differently.
That's really cool. One thing I was going to mention, but I forgot, is that one of the things that I really loved about Kate doing this project, because from my perspective, she was just like, yeah, I'm going to Redbridge again. And I was like, what are you doing? And she was like, I don't know. I'm just looking around. And so one of the things that I really loved is that she bought a big pack of sketchbooks that fit in your back pocket and a little pen. And I think that allowed her to have a tool at her hand at all times. And all of those like portrait images are like half a page of that little sketchbook. And that becomes such an easy tool that you can literally have one in every bag that you carry around. And then if you do have like a spark of inspiration, you can just jot it down instantly, right?
Yeah, and pretty much all of the photos that you see are just on an old iPhone. Like, it's not about quality, it's about like walking through the street as a normal person and not with a massive DSLR camera, which would probably make you act quite differently as well.
But then that's a whole different thing as well.
Yeah, which you could completely do and do it deliberately. And like, there's this amazing project in Brick Lane where people like set up this old Victorian camera on the street. So it's like a massive tripod set up, and then that means that, like, kind of like what I was saying, people come up to them and then they're like, oh, hi, is it okay if we take your picture? Which you probably wouldn't be able to do with an iPhone. So again, it's like just playing with your tools.
Right, but that's also what you're doing with your table, no? And I love that. It's kind of this idea of the feedback that you're collecting the materials from the place, but then you place it back and you kind of curate it. And that suddenly brings the awareness of the observation also to the residents, no?
Yeah.
So you're not anymore kind of a objective external observer, but you have you transform the space, and people realize that they're being watched also, and someone.
I think
that's
also.
Why, not in a bad sense, but that's why they need your business card, right? Because suddenly people realize you're not just a passersby.
Yeah, and also I think from a perspective of an architect or an artist, I think it's a really strong gesture to be there yourself and not just kind of place an object and leave. But you as a person, I like the expression showing up as a kind of a personal expression as well, that you show up and you're there and you show that you care about it. And most architects don't care about the suburbs, but you yourself spent your days there and you cared and you showed up. And that's also quite a nice move, I think.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Sorry. Thanks. No,
Hi.
Hi, guys.
Hi. Thank you for sharing your project. It was really, really amazing. Can you tell us a little bit more about your strategy for organizing your walks? Like, how many hours was it? Because you said day 1, 2, walk 1, walk 2, walk 3, walk 4. But what's the duration of the impact on your psyche? Like, like short period, you feel a certain way. When you're there for a long period, you feel a certain way. Probably if you would spend more time, you would start noticing all the pause points, the sitting points. If it's on the beginning of your walk, what would interest you would be the parts that would lead you to movement and things like that. So that's the first part. The second part is that during the course, how was this integration process with the Nagaberwa, like the local community? Like, did you make more friends there? Did you have interesting conversations? Were there like touch points? Because from the presentation, it was more like more of the public space, but are there any gathering spaces or, like the place that you went to volunteer? So were there like other touch points that kind of, it's in the middle of the everyday life?
Yeah, thank you. So firstly, about how I structured the walks, I guess they were quite like free form. If you read through the booklet, they're of various lengths, but I kind of just followed a pattern where I would go on one walk for some reason and then get distracted by something else. So like I would go to notice all the rubbish and then I'd be like, why are there security cameras everywhere? So I would like set out to record something for the day or just record the first thing that I noticed. And then the next time I came back, I would try to record that thing that had interrupted my thoughts, so that I was just like picking up on whatever these patterns were. Like on a practical level, yeah, sometimes I just cut the walk off because I was too cold, or the really long walk that was like 10K or something. Like you have to stop off at the central library in the middle because they have nice public toilets, that kind of thing. But yeah, just kind of enjoying it. And once you walk, it's funny how you can like walk the same street 10 times and notice something different every time and kind of enjoying that.
Also at some of the occasions you were carrying that really heavy trolley around.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting. On one of the occasions I went along to help because it became too heavy with all these random rubbish in it. And that, to me, it was a shocking revelation that I realized that none of the stations around it are accessible. And there's no elevator or anything. So kind of, even depending on, maybe you should have taken a picture of you, even depending on like what you embody. Are you just you? Are you in a giant coat? Are you with a heavy trolley? It also changed the walk, so it seemed like there was endless variables. And yeah, you did note down quite a lot of different characteristics, but I think kind of the point of it was the spontaneity.
Yeah, and it's true that towards the end I had to end every walk at Barking Station because it's the only one where there's a ramp that I could get my trolley onto the tube. So yeah, practical considerations are definitely important as well. And then what was the second question? The community touch points. Yeah, so it was quite interesting. So at the start, I kind of felt very uncomfortable trying to talk to people, and I went to a few like community meetings, like they have open like talk to your local council person kind of thing, and then I would be sitting on a table like, oh yeah, I don't actually live here, but I'm here because of this reason, and like people just in the discussion being like, oh yeah, well you know the roundabout and you know this place, I was over at Aldersbrook today, and I'm like, I don't know what any of this means. And then by the end of like academic year of walking, I know all the places that they're talking about. I know what that means about the people that they were talking to there. I know the Central Library, which is like loads of people go there all the time. I know the biggest shopping centre in Ilford, which is like where everyone drives at the weekend to hang out. And then building a bit of a relationship with these people at the volunteering group. It was also a bit of a funny dynamic because like most people there are super local to the area and like in their 70s, and then I just show up like, hi, here to help. But then that's also like wonderful to get their perspective and their memories of when that wasn't a motorway, it was a little pub, and they used to tell these kind of stories there and that kind of thing, which is like really wonderful stuff that you wouldn't get if you weren't there. And now, more recently this year, I've been playing, or like it's been more interesting to like think about who I'm acting as or who I'm working with, depending on what I want to get from a situation. So sometimes I'm just walking as like a member of a public, or I might go into a shop and ask something as a member of the public, but then applying for this funding, actually working with a like environmental collective who are based in central London and don't know anything about Redbridge, but then I can bring my knowledge of Redbridge to them at the same time that I'm connecting them with the local Redbridge Council and saying, hi, I'm from this environmental collective, I have some kind of authority on the subject, can I run a workshop with residents around here? So yeah, just like enjoying the kind of different hats that you can wear in any given situation, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
I have a question. What are your next steps for this project? And like, if you're going to be kind of pushing forward some of these changes, what does that advocacy look like, and how are you going to be going about that? I know you mentioned grants, but kind of what are you working on right now with this project?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm like in the final push to collate all this research into a big proposal, which is going to be like across many timescales and like scales of intervention, I guess. So at the same time that I'm doing this very like on the ground kind of stuff, I'm also trying to, when I get home, like do all the paper-based like studies and finding out what the budgets for rubbish are and that kind of thing, so that I kind of see the role of the, well, at CSM they don't really call it architecture, like it's officially an architecture course, but they call it spatial practice, so it's like somewhere between art and architecture and community engagement and this kind of thing. But so the role of a spatial practitioner as like being able to see the big picture and being able to talk to authorities and councils and this kind of thing, and being able to make the official drawings that an engineer can read, but also understanding the really like local level, what residents are feeling, what might a resident want to, like the change they might want to make to their individual house. And so like being able to join up these two like levels of change in the city, I guess. So that's what I'm trying to do by proposing some like small street furniture kind of things, like just implementing compost bins and like a place to put stuff that might be free cycled and that kind of thing. But then also saying, okay, the council spends 19 million a year on rubbish, could they just spend 1 million to make a local depot where materials could be redistributed and that kind of thing. And then where the reality kind of meets the future is like, like I said, I've applied to this grant to do to run a series of workshops. So those would be kind of arts and crafts, like making things out of waste. But the idea is just to keep going with this same methodology to make more connections in the area. And then if something kind of was able to snowball, like, okay, we've got one grant, we have a track record, give us another grant. And then working with this charity and local groups who might show up. Maybe there's a disused place in the area that might want to like start a community garden or start something, that kind of thing, so that like all these small actions might be able to snowball theoretically into a big project. And
I think that's what you're trying to express right now, of how big change incremental interventions can do. So at the moment, Kate's project works on very, very small scale, but at the same time, a very big scale. So I think showing that just, you know, kind of if you walked up to someone that in 10 years, your entire neighborhood could be waste-free. If you just start by getting a compost bin now, kind of showing that on an understandable level of how just one step ahead would help you towards this really big aim that you just think is completely impossible right now.
Yeah.
So kind of communicating this ease towards this huge, seemingly impossible aim. Well, that's how I understand it. That's what you're trying to do now.
Yeah. And as well, it's like about making something for this type of place. So like, yeah, I'm talking about this one specific street, but there's streets just like this all over the country. So if it can happen here, it can happen on the whole country. And how much money saved and like community engagement would that mean if it was rolled out everywhere, kind of thing.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? I think there's a lot of lessons here, and you know, it's really amazing to kind of see the diversity of not only tools that you developed for this, and the kind of process that you've been able to archive as sort of a methodology for practice, which is really, I think, important. Like my favorite parts are the drawings with, you know, the very long landscape drawing that you had, where it took your kind of initial inputs, followed the trails to see where it went into research documents, and then which documents from that you were interested in, you highlighted, and that led to a certain pattern of thinking. And I think that's really, it's really quite a feat, you know, because our research processes are so everywhere at times, and especially on the internet. If we try to conduct it just on the internet, it also feels very flat. And flatness is something we've been discussing with Monitor Lizard during this workshop. How do you break out of that flatness? And I think even just trying to map your journey is a particular way to get out of that. So I really appreciate that. I have one question though. You know, I think you talking about this method of kind of following your interests when you were starting out, just kind of starting the day and seeing where it takes you from trash can to security camera to whatever.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you or anyone else here has suggestions to how to almost break out of your personal, let's say, radar, your personal lens, if that's even possible to manage. Because I think it's important to also recognize that you have a certain way of looking at it, right? And I wonder if the same exercise were to take place with someone different from a completely different background, completely different part of the world, how, you know, how things might be potentially go in a completely different direction, let's say, and how you can also learn from each other in breaking out from those kind of, you know, ingrained ways of looking at things.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you can like ever completely abandon your instincts, I guess, but one thing that I've done in an activism workshop, actually, from a kind of other, not so much architectural, but it was a kind of role play exercise where you have to have a debate with someone as if you're the person who you would completely disagree with. So like if I'm the Prime Minister saying we have to cut all funding to hospitals, like I'm trying to argue that point, then it kind of gives you this newfound empathy and like be able to see where they can worm their way around the argument. Then you can kind of flip back to the other side and fill in those gaps. That's cool. But it's also like, I kind of touched on it before, like just the language that you use. So like I might spend a week or two just looking at local authority planning documents and reading, and they're always like 100 pages long. They have a few maps and just like a load of waffle about, oh, we're gonna make some great changes, everyone will share the neighborhood, and then like, what does that mean? But then like letting that language sink in, and then maybe I try and make a drawing that's completely fitting with that style, so that then I can bring it to the council and they'll easily understand it and be like, oh yeah, it's going to give us this much community change and this many things, and it will be a shiny new neighborhood. I understand that, great. And then if you're talking to like a local activist group, you just have a placard that's like, this is what I want to do. Let's go on a march, or I don't know. Yeah.
I have a different idea, but I also think this is a very good one. For me, it's been really interesting personally to live in London in a place that, so Kate and I live in a place that we would never be able to afford, probably ever in our lives, especially as artists. And we found ourselves in this place. And for me, it's a very interesting thing to experience, because when I walk around in supposedly my own neighborhood, I feel like I am completely looking at it from the outside. So I think this kind of, and I find really interesting things, because people around here live very different lives than I do. And it would all fade into the background if I felt like I was part of this place. So I think finding this kind of place of discomfort is very useful. Yeah. Kind of, you can't like become a different person, but you can become the other person in a place. So if you can't like displace your personality, you can displace where you are, your context, and then the connection that you have to the place changes. And it's not you who changes, but the connection. And that's kind of an easy shift for me. So if you kind of, I think even if you want to do something in your own neighborhood, maybe look at a place that's the opposite of your neighborhood, and then look at something that's interesting there, and then reflect. I guess it's the same as the role play. Look at the opposite and then reflect back on your own norm from the point of view from the opposite. So for me, this kind of, actually in the heat of lockdown, or like in the peak of lockdown, we walked around and it was so odd for me. I was just like, all of these really fancy shops are like just as empty as the ones going bankrupt. And it was a really odd thing for me to, it literally felt like I was looking into an empty neighborhood from the outside, but I was in it. I'm part of the neighborhood, but it looks like looking into an empty shop. And so kind of, I think finding this discomfort is very useful. It's very uncomfortable. Yeah, obviously.
No, that's a really good point. That like it's quite easy to just find your comfort zone. Like, I want to just do hand drawings, and I'm not going to talk to anyone, and I'm just going to take photos from this prescribed distance. But then you have to like, exactly, find where you're a little bit uncomfortable and like keep like picking at
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a lot of personal effort to do something like that. So it's tough, and I like how you said your natural inclination is to be introverted in these experiences, in these moments, but you were really trying to force yourself to go the other way with that, and devise methods or devise ways of breaking that. I am curious. I mean, because I think there's one thing to be careful about, though, because we talk about going to other places and looking around and documenting, and it's always an experience from you and not necessarily from the eyes of the people who actually live there and who experience things and can kind of show you things that you wouldn't see just by walking around, right? So I wonder if you can share any experiences with that, if that happened. If I know you said people yelled at you, but like, was anyone like, oh, this is really interesting, here's my opinion on this place? I mean, I'm saying that without acknowledging the fact that you did say that it's important to kind of give back to the community during your research. So like the volunteering, I think, is one of those ways. But it's great that you found organizations that are working there and you wanted to just learn from them. So I think that is a great way to deal with that issue.
Yeah. I think one point that's really important is that, like, I don't know, there's this like idea of community within, as like a buzzword within architecture, where people throw it around like, we've done this many consultations and this is what the community wants, like, for sure. But like what came out during this, and I guess it's a little bit specific to the area because it's like such a range of demographics there, but is that there is no one community. Like, there are small grassroots groups on one side of Redbridge who might completely disagree with the community group right next to them, and kind of just trying to acknowledge as much as possible this like diversity of thought, and also like as well, by making yourself visible on the street, you kind of it's kind of a method of consent where people can approach you. Then it's not as intrusive, and not me like plastering my ideas on anywhere. Trying to like always stay open with what's like sources I'm using and where I've gotten ideas from other people, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's definitely tricky.
I was just thinking that for this, I would imagine as an extrovert that being an introvert is very useful as well. Of like, I am very easily will jump to a conclusion and communicate that. But I think it's probably useful for you to just stand back a little bit and listen to what people say more. Obviously, I try to do it, but I think it's I find that hard. So like also realize your strengths and use them in new ways.
I guess the point that I'm trying to get at is that to try and just admit that I am present in this work and that I come at this from this angle because I grew up in this place and I have a particular interest in rubbish or whatever. But that like I'm not going to present it as a clean document. Like, this is the 2020 result of a survey of Redbridge that reveals that everyone believes that there should be compost bins on your street. You know what I mean? It's like, here I am. This is my idea. Take it or leave it. This is more my approach.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great to point out too, that it's not trying to claim any certain form of knowledge like over another one. It's just saying, this is my perspective, this is what I observed, it's flawed, but here it is. I think you started off with saying that your first goal was just to observe, just to be present, and that's really important. I think as a form of practice is that's something I always try to teach whenever doing field trips or something. It's like we're not going to make any assumptions, we're not going to try to raise expectations or assert any sort of idea onto this place. We're just going to observe and then reflect, but that reflection comes after the observation. Okay, I think we'll stop it there. This has been great. It's been very, I think, personally helpful for me. I hope it's the same for everyone else, just to influence your guys' research practices as we move forward. So thank you for kicking it off. I think it takes a lot of nerve to step up to that plate. So thank you for doing that, and in the middle of your intense finals as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be a part of it, and I hope we can follow along with what great stuff you guys produce.
Yeah, once you two are done, please stay and join the conversations. It'd be great to have you jump on board and follow along.
Yeah,
definitely.
Awesome. Thanks.
Nice
Okay,
to see
everybody.
everyone.
Sorry?
Nice to see everyone here as well.
Yeah, everybody, thanks for joining. As always, those who are up early or those who are staying up late, we appreciate it. We're going to work on this timing. If there's any suggestions on how to improve the timing for anyone, please let us know in the Discord chat. And we'll update everyone about the plans for tomorrow and the following weeks. So thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.